Thank you all for joining us in our morning Bible study. We have come up to the 29th verse of Acts chapter 7. We're going to carry on from verse 30. And as I shared earlier, from verse 2 to verse 53 is Stephen recounting the history of Israel from Abraham until Jesus to remind the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council, about what has happened from the very beginning. And it's like a story, but yet there are so many profound truths in it. And if you come to the point where Moses had left Egypt and came to Midian because he was afraid that someone might kill him. And verse 29, actually, we'll go back to verse 29. It says, when Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner and had 2 sons. What did he hear? 2 Israelites who were fighting. And then, why are you fighting? You the brothers, why are you fighting? And then one of them questioned Moses, who are the judges? And don't you know that you killed the Egyptian yesterday? And then suddenly Moses realized that they come to know that he killed the Egyptian the previous day. So he ran away from there. And he's now in Midian. Midian actually is across the Red Sea. Today is Saudi Arabia. And that's where actually the Ishmaelites were from. And so he's there for 40 years. And then verse 30 says, after 40 years had passed, an angel appeared to Moses, the flame of a burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai. And interestingly, Mount Sinai is not in Egypt as many people think. It's in Arabia. In fact, Galatians 4:25 says Mount Sinai in Arabia. So in Midian, the further north from after crossing the Red Sea, when you go up north, you'll find Mount Horeb. Horeb or Sinai is basically the same. Sinai is actually area, Sinai Peninsula. One of the peaks there is Mount Horeb, where actually God gave Moses the commandments, and he fled there, and after 40 years, he appeared in the flames of burning bush in the desert near Mount Sinai on the plains. The bush was in the plains, and then later on we'll see about how he went up the Mount of Sinai when he brought the Israelites out from Egypt. But before he went there, he was called by God to an angel in a bush. Verse 31. When he saw this, he was amazed at the sight. As he went over to look more closely, he heard the Lord's voice. He saw an angel, the burning bush. The bush didn't burn, it didn't burn out. It was burning, but did not burn out. Hear the Lord's voice. Verse 32. I am the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Moses trembled with fear, did not dare to look. Now, as if God introduced himself to Moses, he was 80 years old. Let's not forget, the age of 40, he left Pharaoh's court and went and joined the Israelites. 40 years had passed, so now he's 80 years old. At the age of 80, God introduced himself to Moses. I'm the God of your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But something happened at the age of 40, because of which he left Pharaoh's court and joined the Israelites. What happened? I asked you to read earlier when I shared the message on Wednesday. I told you, please read 11th chapter of Hebrews, verses 24 to 27, especially verse 26. So I'm going to request, who's going to read the Bible today? Bible reading?
I am, Uncle. Shiny is.
Okay. Can you read the 11th chapter of Hebrews, verses 24 to 27, especially verse 26, with emphasis on 26 verse.
Okay. Hebrews 11, 24 to 26. By faith, Moses, when he became of age, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Verse 26, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he looked to the reward.
It mentions verse 26, mentions Christ. For sake of Christ left. How come he knew about Christ? You're 40 years old. At the age of 80, God revealed himself as God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But 40 years earlier, for the sake of Christ, he left the treasures of Egypt and joined the Israelites. That's because his heart does put the realization, for the sake of Christ, he has to let go of the pleasures of Egypt and join the Israelites. At the age of 40, as we discussed earlier, verse 22, educated all wisdom of the Egyptians, and powerful in speech and action. He was a orator, powerful in speech and action, educated by the wise men of Egypt, the wisdom of the Egyptians. He had everything at his feet, treasures of Egypt at his feet. He left everything for the sake of Christ. Somehow in the heart of Moses, there was put a revelation that for the sake of Christ, he has to leave Pharaoh's court and join with the Israelites. Now, we all know that no one's ever seen God, because in 1 Timothy 6:16 says, God lives in unapproachable light. No one has seen or can see him. No one has seen or can see him. Yet we see in the Bible how God spoke to certain people face to face, even with Moses. As a friend, face to face, God spoke to Moses. Who was that God that spoke to Moses? It was the Christ. In fact, John 1:18 says, no one has ever seen God, but God, the only begotten Son, who the Father said, has made him known. So all revelations of God in the Old Testament also were actually the Christ, the Messiah, the Son of God. The one who accompanied Moses and the Israelites from Egypt to the land of Canaan was Christ. He left Pharaoh's court at the age of 40, from the Israelites, for the sake of Christ, who had not yet come to the world. Who accompanied him from Egypt to the land of Canaan? The Christ. How do you know that? Shiny, could you please read 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3 and 4. 1 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 3 and 4.
Shall I read from verse 1 onwards? Chapter 10.
No, verse 3 and 4, not 1.
3 and 4. All ate the same spiritual food and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ.
That rock was Christ. They refers to the Israelites. The Israelites who came from Egypt. So who accompanied them all the way? That rock was Christ. So much before Christ came, people had a revelation of Christ, and Moses somehow knew about Christ in his heart. As we discussed sometime back, one of the evening sessions, how Abraham obeyed all the commandments, decrees, requirements, and laws of God. It says in the book of Genesis, 26 chapter verse 5, 26:5 Genesis. And the law was given 430 years later. So how come Abraham kept the law? It was in his heart. In the same way, in his heart, the heart of Moses, there must be a revelation that Christ is going to come. For the sake of Christ, he left Pharaoh's court in Egypt and joined with the Israelites. Let's go on. Verse 31. When he saw this, he was amazed at the sight. When he saw what? The burning bush. Didn't burn out, it was burning, and yet God spoke at that time to him. As he went over to look more closely, he heard Lord's voice. Okay, I am the God of Abraham. We already covered that. Most temple is pure. Verse 32, we finished. 33. Then the Lord said to him, take off your sandals. The place where you are standing is holy ground. I have indeed seen the oppression of my people in Egypt. I've heard their groaning and have come down to set them free. Now come, I will send you back to Egypt. We read it earlier also how when God called him, Moses gave many excuses to go. And the real underlying reason why he did not want to go or hesitate to go was he feared that those living in Jerusalem, in Egypt, would kill him because he had killed an Egyptian. That's why he gave so many excuses. But the Lord told him, Exodus 4th chapter, 19-20, those who are trying to kill you are now dead. The Lord told him that. Moses goes. He goes. And God called him from Mount Horeb, burning bush, to go and bring his people out of Egypt. Called by God to do this. Verse 35. This is the same Moses whom they rejected with the words, who made you ruler and judge? Because when he killed the Egyptian, the Israelites who were fighting said, who are you to judge? You killed the Egyptian yesterday. The same Moses they rejected, God called Moses to go and bring the Israelites out. He was sent to the ruler and deliverer by God himself through the angel who appeared to him in the bush. Now, by the way, angel, the word angel is angelon in Greek. And even sometimes human beings are referred to as angels. In fact, the 13th chapter of Hebrews verse 1 says, don't forget to entertain strangers. For in so doing, some entertain angels. Don't forget to entertain strangers in your house. In that process, entertain angels. Because who are angels? General meaning for angels is angelon. It means ministering spirits. Hebrews 1:14 says, are not all angels ministering spirits sent to serve those who inherit salvation? So human beings also are referred to sometimes as angels. For example, 7th chapter of Revelation, the head of the church, the pastor or whatever, head of the church, is actually the lamp, the star in which Jesus had 7 stars in his hand, angel of each of the 7 churches. 7 churches are the 7 lampstands that are there in the book of Revelation, which John saw. Lampstands are the churches, 7 churches, and the stars are 7 angels. Angel of the church, meaning the head of the church, human being, pastor or whatever, head of the church. There are also other angels, seraph and cherub. Cherub is singular, cherubim is plural. They are also referred to as angels. So angels are basically ministering spirits. So through the bush, an angel ministered to Moses, and he heard the Lord's voice himself. The Lord himself, he spoke to him, and Moses heard that. Okay, verse 36. He led them out of Egypt and did wonders and miracles in Egypt at the Red Sea and for 40 years in the desert. This is still recounting the history of Israel, how God brought Israel out of Egypt, did miracles along the way. There are 10 miracles actually. Of 10 miracles, 3 of them were actually imitated by the Egyptian magicians, the first 3 miracles. Of the third one, they could not imitate. They could not replicate. That's all. That's the limitation of the power of the evil spirits, occult forces. Magicians were like the occult forces. They use occult forces to try to replicate the miracles Moses did through the power of God. Out of 10 miracles, only 3 could be replicated by the Egyptian magicians. The remaining 7, they could not. And God confirmed his calling to Moses with miracles, wonders, and signs. Verse 37. This is that Moses who told the Israelites, God will send you a prophet like me from your own people. This is actually referring to the Christ himself. Deuteronomy 18 chapter verse 15. That's what I referred to here. I already told you about how when John the Baptist came, he said very openly, I am not the Christ. And they asked him, are you Elijah? He says, no. Are you the prophet? No. That's John chapter 1, 15, 16, 17. If we read that passage, talks about, they explain 3 people to come. The Messiah to come, Elijah to come, and the prophet to come. Who's the prophet? The prophet referred to by Moses in the book of Deuteronomy 18:15. And here it said, this that same Moses who said, God raise you, send you a prophet like me from your own people. He was in the assembly in the desert, that is Moses, with the angel who spoke to him on Mount Sinai, and with our fathers, and they received living words to pass on to us. Living words. I told you on Wednesday how when he was 40 years old, he was full of Egyptian wisdom, powerful in speech and action, orator, a political leader probably to be the next Pharaoh. Next 40 years, he lost that powerful speech and even forgot he had it. Became a zero at the age of 80. I've never been eloquent, neither in the past, nor since spoken to servant. I'm not a speaker at all. I'm not eloquent. I'm slow of speech and tongue. He was a stammerer actually at the age of 80. Then God actually untrained him for the previous 40 years. First 40 years trained by the Egyptian wise men. Next 40 years untrained by God, by Moses interacting and having fellowship with sheep. What can a sheep tell you about your oratory skills? Nothing. Oh, you're a wonderful speaker. Can a sheep say? No. He lost a powerful speech, and God took away the memory of it. So at the age of 40, powerful speaker, age of 80, zero speaker. Next 40 years, God trained him. First 40 years, Egyptian trained him. Next 40 years, God untrained him. 80 to 120, God trained him. At the age of 120, before the Israelites entered the land of Canaan, the Lord tells through Moses the people, the words I'm speaking are not idle words. They are your life. Words I'm speaking are your life. Could you read that once again? We read that on Wednesday. Again, you can read, Shiny. Book of Deuteronomy, 32nd chapter, 46 and 47. Deuteronomy 32, 46, 47.
32, 46, and 47. And he said to them, set your hearts on all the words which I testify among you today, which you shall command your children to be careful to observe all the words of this law. For it is not a futile thing for you, because it is your life, and by this word you shall prolong your days in the land which you cross over the Jordan to possess.
This is your life. The words I'm speaking are your life. Living words, life-giving words. So at the age of 40, Egyptian wisdom. Age of 80, zero. Age of 120, passing on living words, words of life to the people of God. That's how God dealt with Moses. And therefore, before God trains us, sometimes he untrains us. He removes the unwanted things that we developed over the years. A typical example of Moses. Three lifespans. First 40 years, second 40 years, third 40 years. At the age of 120, before the end of the land of Canaan, he repeated the law to the Israelites. The word Deuteronomy actually means repetition of the law. And he repeats everything to them to remind them what they've heard before. They're going to cross over. He won't cross over, but he tells them, live by this word. They're not idle words. They are your life. And by them, you live long in the land because they were Jordan to possess. Living words. So here, Stephen reminds them how Moses received living words to pass on to us. Same was passed on to the Israelites at the time Stephen wrote, first century. From around 15th century BC to the first century AD, those words are passed on, the law of Moses, words of life. Let's go on. 39. But our fathers refused to obey him. Instead, rejected him, and in their hearts turned back to Egypt. Turned back to Egypt. Now, when they left Egypt, they were told not to go back there. In the book of Deuteronomy 17:16, you should not go back that way again. God rescued them from Egypt, brought them land of Canaan. Not supposed to go back. In their hearts, they went back. A heart was in Egypt. They didn't physically go back to Egypt. In the heart, they went back to Egypt. Then you know how they grumbled. 11th chapter of Numbers, read about how they grumbled about, oh, there we had cucumber, melons, garlic, leeks, onions, fish. Here the miserable food. But they forgot that they have been promised a land of milk and honey. They didn't combine the good news by faith. The hearts, they went back to Egypt, cherishing all the food they had there. Can you imagine? Melons, cucumber, leeks, garlics, onions, fish. They're cherishing all those things, missing all those things. They didn't realize that God's taking them a land of milk and honey. Of course, in the wilderness, they had little food, but that's why they live by faith, by every word that comes from God. In the hearts, they went back to Egypt. Verse 40. They told Aaron, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who led us out of Egypt, we don't know what has happened to him. Because he went up the mount for 40 days and 40 nights. In the 40 days, they got impatient. So what happened to him? He's gone away. There was a time they made an idol in the form of a calf. They brought sacrifices to it and held a celebration in honor of what the hands had made. But God turned away and gave them over to worship of the heavenly bodies. This agrees with what is written in the book of the prophet. And the prophet referred to here is actually Amos. Amos chapter 5, 25 to 27. And that's quoted by Stephen here from verse 42 onwards. Now, what happened actually when Moses went up the Mount of Sinai, 40 days, 40 nights he was there. In the meantime, people got impatient and they made a calf out of the gold they had. They made the calf, golden calf. Where did they get the gold from? Before they left Egypt, God had told Moses to tell the Egyptian women to ask their, told the Israel women to tell ask the Egyptian women, neighbors, for gold, silver, and clothing. And God told them, I will move their hearts to give you clothing, gold, and silver. So God used the Egyptian women, neighbors of the Israelites, to give them gold, silver, and clothing. What did they do with the gold? They made a calf out of it. The very things God gave them, they used it to make an idol for themselves. How gracious God is. But then look at these people. They made a golden calf. We don't know about this man. He's gone away. This fellow's gone up. We don't know what's happened to him. Let's make it. Even Aaron is part of this conspiracy. They made an idol. And they were told very clearly, Exodus 28 chapter, 3 onwards, don't make idols. Don't make an image made by man. Don't worship it. But they worship this calf, a golden calf. Gold came from where? From Egyptian. God moved the Egyptian to give them gold. Gold, silver, and clothing they got as a gift when they came from Egypt. But use that thing to go against God. How often the very things God gives us, they make them idols for us. And therefore, be very careful. We learn from these examples and not to. Now, let's go to the New Testament and learn from the experience of the Israelites what not to do. Shani, could you read 10 verses in the Bible? 1 Corinthians 10 chapter, verse 1 to 10. 1 Corinthians 10 chapter, verse 1 to 10. Again, this is about what they did when they came from Egypt, the Israelites, the things they did along the way, and why they died in the desert, so many of them.
1 Corinthians 10, verses 1 to 10. Moreover, brethren, I do not want you to be unaware that all your fathers were under the cloud, all passed through the sea, all were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of that spiritual rock that followed them, and that rock was Christ. But with most of them God was not well pleased, for their bodies were scattered in the wilderness. Now these things became our examples to the intent that we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted, and to not become idolaters as they were some of them. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Nor let us commit sexual immorality as some of them did, and in one day 23,000 fell. Nor let us tempt Christ as some of them also tempted, and were destroyed by serpents. Nor complain as some of them also complained, and were destroyed by the destroyer.
You read 11th and 12th verse also.
Now all these things happened to them as examples, and they were written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he fall. Should I read verse 13?
No, don't. Just 12 was enough. Now, in the first 10 verses, it talks about 4 kinds of sins they committed along the way from Egypt. Sexual immorality, idolatry, referred to here when they worship that calf, idolatry, testing God. The word you said that, tempting God, the word tempting and testing basically means the same. It is a pyrasmos. They were testing God. They tested God along the way by complaining about him. And they complain. So 4 kinds of sins: sexual immorality, idolatry, testing God, and grumbling, for which they died in the desert. They died because of grumbling. God sent snakes to bite them. We read in the Bible, 21st chapter of Numbers, how when they grumble, God sent snakes to bite them, and they were killed by snakes for grumbling. Such was the standard of those days. So we should read on for them as warnings for us. Don't be like them. Today we are saved by grace, but the grace is not a license for us to continue in sin. We are called to be people who are set apart to be holy before God. 2 Timothy 1:9 says, He saved us and called us to a holy life. So everything written in the past was written to teach us. If we learn from these experiences, what to do, what not to do. How to follow people who follow the Lord, and how not to follow people who do not follow the Lord. Here's an example for us. In the Bible, nobody is perfect except Jesus. Everybody has some flaw or the other. We learn from the good things they did, not the flaws they did. Don't imitate them in their flaws, their weaknesses. We imitate them in the good things they did. And for that, we need to imitate their faith. By faith, they did what they did, the good things. And we have faith God gives us to do what we have to do. So they all grumbled along the way. Sexual immorality, testing God, grumbling, and idolatry. Now he's quoting the prophet Amos, 5th chapter of Amos, 25-27. He's quoting that between verses 42 onwards. Did you bring me sacrifices and offerings? 40 years in desert, O house of Israel. You lift up the shrine of Molech. Molech is the god of the Ammonites. And the god of the Moabites was actually Chemosh. And they're all along the way, the eastern side of the river Jordan, the gods who worship the Ammonites and Moabites. The star of your god, Rephan. The idols you made to worship. Therefore, I'll send you into exile beyond Babylon. And that was actually God spoke through Amos. That was 100 years before they were exiled into Babylon. At the time when Amos was prophesying along with Hosea in northern kingdom Israel. Southern kingdom, there was actually Isaiah and Micah. And in Israel, they didn't listen. Jerusalem, they listened and they spared, but Israel didn't listen. So Assyrians came and overran. And later on, about 120 years later, even in Jerusalem, they were overrun by the Babylonians because they did not listen to what the prophet Jeremiah prophesied. Verse 44. Our forefathers had a tabernacle testimony with them in the desert. It had been made as God directed Moses according to the pattern he had seen. A replica of the tabernacle in heaven, and tabernacle to be a temple to be built in Jerusalem, a replica of that. A prototype. Verse 45. Having received the tabernacle, our fathers under Joshua brought it with them when they took the land from the nations. God drove before them. He remained in the land until the time of David, who enjoyed God's favor and asked that he might provide a dwelling place for the God of Jacob. But it was Solomon who built the house for him. They didn't want to build a temple in Jerusalem. God told him, you won't build the temple. Your son Solomon will build the temple. Very interesting to see. But God did not allow David to build the temple. He's a compassionate God. He didn't make David the builder of the temple, but he gave him a consolation prize. He made them an architect. So compassionate. You won't build the temple. Your son Solomon will build the temple. But God made him the architect. So you could read the 1 Chronicles 28, chapter verse 12. 1 Chronicles 28, 12.
And the plans for all that he had by the Spirit of the courts of the house of the Lord, of all the chambers all around, of the treasuries of the house of God, and of all the treasuries for the dedicated things.
Yeah, the Holy Spirit put in the mind of David the plans for temple. The previous verse talks about, in my version says, David gave Solomon the plans Spirit put in mind for temple courts, surrounding rooms, and treasuries. The architecture of temple is put in the mind of David by the Holy Spirit, who gave Solomon the plans. So God made him the architect, not the builder. And we're going to see next verse, a very powerful verse that is. We won't discuss it, there's no time. We'll begin Monday's meeting with the 48th verse. How God does not live in houses made by men. Very important to understand this. Today, God doesn't live in a church building. He lives among us, God's people. And therefore, we'll carry on from verse 48 on Monday. And read the whole chapter again and come, the whole 7th chapter. Again, go back to it and absorb profound truths in the Bible. God bless you. We start from verse 48 on Monday. God bless you all.